The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with whispered conversations as representatives from dozens of species gathered for the monthly assembly. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus and gazed down at the newest member's delegation with barely concealed amusement. "Look at them," he chittered to his aide, gesturing toward the human representatives with one of his four arms. "They can barely walk in a straight line without bumping into something." Indeed, the three human diplomats seemed to confirm every stereotype the galaxy had formed about their species. Ambassador Sarah Chen stumbled slightly as she navigated around a low table, catching herself with an embarrassed smile. Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, had already knocked over a ceremonial water vessel during the pre-session mingling, profusely apologizing to a group of tall, graceful Etherians who looked down at him with polite disdain. The third human, General Patricia Hayes, moved with more purpose but still lacked the fluid grace that characterized most galactic species. Her heavy footsteps echoed awkwardly in the vast chamber designed for beings who typically glided, floated, or moved with perfect precision. "Humans," laughed Velthar, the serpentine delegate from Nexus Prime. His scales shimmered with mirth as he coiled his lengthy body into an elegant spiral. "How did such a clumsy species ever achieve spaceflight? They trip over their own feet walking on flat surfaces." The mockery wasn't entirely unfounded. Since joining the Galactic Council 18 months ago, humans had gained a reputation for physical awkwardness that bordered on the legendary. Their athletes were considered mediocre by galactic standards. Their dancers were politely ignored at cultural exchanges. Even their military demonstrations showed soldiers who seemed perpetually on the verge of tripping over their own equipment. Ambassador Chen finally reached her designated seat, accidentally bumping the chair twice before settling in. She opened her data pad, fumbling with the controls for a moment before the holographic display activated. Several alien delegates exchanged knowing looks. "The chair recognizes the delegate from Terra," announced the session moderator, a towering being of pure energy contained within a geometric framework. Sarah stood steadying herself against the podium. "Thank you, honored chair. The Terran Federation wishes to address the Council regarding the ongoing piracy crisis in the Outer Rim territories." A wave of disinterest rippled through the chamber. The Outer Rim pirates had been a minor nuisance for decades, barely worth mentioning in serious diplomatic circles. Most species had written off those distant systems as ungovernable wastelands, where only the desperate and criminal chose to operate. "We propose a joint task force to eliminate this threat," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength despite her physical awkwardness. "Human forces are prepared to lead this initiative." The chamber erupted in barely suppressed laughter. Kethvar didn't bother to hide his amusement. "With respect, Ambassador Chen, human military capabilities are limited. Your species struggles with basic coordination in peaceful environments. How could you possibly handle combat operations against seasoned pirates?" Dr. Webb shifted uncomfortably in his seat, accidentally knocking his stylus to the floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence, adding weight to Kethvar's words. "Perhaps," suggested Velthar with mock helpfulness, "the humans could provide support roles. Medical aid, supply transport. Leave the actual fighting to species better suited for it." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. "We appreciate the Council's concern. However, I believe you may be underestimating human capabilities. Our clumsiness, as you call it, doesn't extend to all areas of human activity." "Oh?" Kethvar leaned forward, his crystalline features glittering with skeptical amusement. "And what areas might those be?" "Combat," General Hayes said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber. Her voice carried a weight that made several delegates pause their whispered conversations. The Zephyrian ambassador's laugh was like the tinkling of wind chimes. "Combat? Your own footage shows human soldiers stumbling through training exercises. Your elite units move like newborns learning to walk." General Hayes stood slowly, her movement still lacking the fluid grace of other species, but carrying an undeniable presence. "What you've seen are our standard forces during peacetime training. Every species represented here has observed our public military demonstrations and drawn their conclusions based on limited data." "Are you suggesting," asked the moderator, "that human military capabilities differ significantly from what has been observed?" "I'm suggesting," Hayes replied carefully, that no species in this galaxy has seen what humanity is truly capable of when the situation demands it. What you call clumsiness, we call restraint. The chamber fell silent. Several delegates exchanged uncertain glances. There was something in the human general's tone that didn't match the bumbling reputation her species had earned. Ambassador Chen seized the moment. The pirate situation in the Outer Rim has escalated beyond simple harassment. 3 colonies have been completely destroyed in the past month. Entire populations enslaved or killed. This requires immediate action. Tragic, certainly, Kethvar acknowledged with affected sympathy, but hardly surprising in such lawless regions. Perhaps if those colonists had chosen more civilized systems. 2 of those colonies were human settlements, Dr. Webb said softly, his earlier clumsiness forgotten as his expression hardened. The 3rd was a mixed-species research station. 47 children among the casualties. The mood in the chamber shifted subtly. While the Outer Rim was considered expendable by most galactic powers, the targeting of children violated certain universal taboos. We're not asking for permission, General Hayes continued. We're informing the Council of our intentions as a courtesy. Human fleets are already moving toward the Outer Rim. We will eliminate the pirate threat. Impossible, scoffed Veltar. The Crimson Fleet has over 200 ships, battle-hardened crews, and complete knowledge of those systems. They've resisted every previous attempt to dislodge them. Sarah stood again, this time without stumbling. Perhaps previous attempts weren't conducted with sufficient motivation. Or competence, added Dr. Webb, his mild academic demeanor concealing something that made nearby delegates unconsciously lean away. The energy being that served as moderator pulsed thoughtfully. Very well. The Council will observe this human initiative with interest. However, when this endeavor fails, as it almost certainly will, the Terran Federation will bear full responsibility for any consequences. Understood. Sarah nodded. But I think you'll find the results educational. As the session moved to other matters, whispered conversations resumed throughout the chamber. Most delegates were already composing reports to their home governments about the humans' latest display of naive overconfidence. None of them noticed the subtle changes in the 3 human representatives. The way their earlier awkwardness had vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous. None of them realized they had just witnessed humanity drop its mask for the first time since joining the galactic community. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UHNS Retribution, watching the swirling vortex of hyperspace through the main view screen. Around her, the crew worked with an efficiency that would have shocked the galactic observers who had grown accustomed to watching humans fumble through their daily routines. Jump complete? Captain, announced Lieutenant Commander Torres from the navigation station. His movements were precise, economical. Nothing like the bumbling displayed during the public demonstrations that had entertained alien audiences for months. We're now in the Kepler 442 system. Outer Rim coordinates confirmed. Excellent. Signal the fleet to assume formation Delta 7. Aye, Captain. All ships responding. Formation complete in 30 seconds. Through the view screen, Elena watched as 47 human warships smoothly arranged themselves into a complex 3-dimensional pattern that would have been impossible for the clumsy species the galaxy thought they knew. Each vessel moved with mathematical precision, taking positions calculated to provide maximum firepower coverage while maintaining optimal defensive overlaps. Still can't believe. Command authorized a full battle group for this, muttered Sergeant Phillips from the communications console. Usually they send us out there with minimal support and tell us to make do. Different situation this time, Elena replied, her voice carrying an edge that made her bridge crew exchange knowing looks. This isn't a peacekeeping mission or a show of force for alien observers. This is war. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. For 18 months, humanity had played the role of the galactic community's friendly but incompetent neighbors. They had smiled through condescending lectures, stumbled through diplomatic ceremonies, and allowed other species to believe they understood human capabilities. All of that was about to change. Captain, called out Lieutenant Hayes from the sensor station, we're picking up massive energy signatures from the 4th planet. Looks like the pirates have turned the entire moon into a fortress. I'm counting at least 60 ships in orbit, plus orbital defense platforms. Elena studied the tactical display that materialized above her command chair, The Crimson Fleet had indeed built an impressive stronghold. Layered shields, automated weapon systems, and what appeared to be 3 separate command bunkers buried deep beneath the lunar surface. "They're good," she admitted. "Professional-grade defenses. No wonder they've held this territory for so long." "Should we wait for additional support?" asked Torres. "Intelligence estimates put their total strength at over 200 vessels." "No." Elena's response was immediate and final. "We end this today. Signal all ships to begin deployment sequence, and activate the dampening fields." "Dampening fields online, Captain. All fleet vessels are now invisible to standard sensors." This was technology that humanity had never demonstrated publicly. While other species relied on complex energy shields and heavy armor for defense, humans had developed something far more elegant: the ability to simply disappear from detection. It wasn't invisibility in the traditional sense, but rather a sophisticated manipulation of electromagnetic and gravitational fields that made their ships effectively non-existent to most scanning methods. Stealth deployment complete. "We're ghosts, Captain." Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Signal Fleet Command. Begin hunter-killer operations." Across the human fleet, specialists who had spent years being dismissed as clumsy buffoons transformed into something entirely different. These were the operators who had never appeared in public demonstrations, never stumbled through diplomatic ceremonies, never given alien observers any reason to believe humanity, possessed capabilities beyond the mundane. The first pirate patrol never knew what hit them. Lieutenant Maria Santos moved through the cramped corridors of the captured freighter with liquid grace, her movements so fluid they seemed to defy the laws of physics. Behind her, 5 other members of Recon Team Alpha flowed like shadows, their earlier clumsiness revealed as an elaborate performance maintained for over a year. "Charges set," whispered Corporal Kim through the comm system. "We'll have complete control of their communication array in 30 seconds. Copy that. Initiating Phase 2. What followed would have been impossible for the bumbling humans that alien audiences had grown accustomed to watching. Team Alpha moved through the pirate vessel like liquid death, neutralizing guards with surgical precision before they could raise an alarm. Every movement was calculated, every action performed with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. In the ship's communication center, Kim's fingers danced across alien control systems with perfect fluency, languages that humans supposedly struggled to understand, bent to his will as he systematically infiltrated the pirates' network. "We're in," he reported. "Full access to their command structure. Should I begin the virus upload?" "Affirmative. Give them something special." Back on the Retribution, Captain Vasquez watched as red dots began disappearing from the tactical display. Each vanishing signal represented a pirate vessel that had ceased to exist in the span of heartbeats, their crews never understanding what had destroyed them. "Stealth teams report objectives complete," announced Phillips. 12 patrol ships eliminated, no survivors, no transmissions. Phase 2? Underway. Teams are now targeting the orbital platforms Elena had spent years watching. Alien diplomats smirk at human limitations. She had sat through countless briefings where other species discussed humanity as if they were well-meaning but ultimately harmless children. Every condescending smile, every polite dismissal, every assumption of human incompetence had been carefully catalogued and remembered. Now it was time for the galaxy to learn what humanity had been hiding. "Captain, something's happening on the pirate flagship," Torres reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Massive power fluctuations, internal explosions. Their entire command structure is going dark." "Good. Signal the fleet. Begin Phase 3. Across the human formation, weapon systems that had never been publicly demonstrated began to activate. These weren't the crude energy weapons or simple projectile systems that humanity had shown during their military demonstrations. These were instruments of war refined through centuries of human conflict, adapted with technologies that no alien observer had been permitted to witness. "All ships report ready." "Captain." Elena stood, her earlier facade of diplomatic politeness falling away completely. "Signal the remaining pirate forces." "Open channel." The view screen shifted to show a communications interface. After a moment, a scarred alien face appeared, its features twisted with fury and growing panic. "Who are you?" the pirate leader snarled. "What happened to my patrols?" "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Human Naval Service," she replied, her voice carrying absolute authority. You have killed children. You have enslaved innocents. You have made the mistake of believing that human restraint was human weakness. Impossible. Humans are pathetic, clumsy. We've seen your military demonstrations. You can barely walk without falling down. Elena's smile was a predator's expression. Those demonstrations were designed to make you think exactly that. What you're about to witness is what happens when humanity stops pretending to be harmless. She gestured to Torres. Fire. The universe erupted in light. From 47 human warships, weapons systems that defied galactic understanding, unleashed devastation that rewrote the pirates' comprehension of warfare. These weren't the clumsy energy blasts or inefficient projectile weapons that humanity had demonstrated during their carefully orchestrated public displays. These were instruments of annihilation perfected through millennia of human warfare and enhanced with technologies that no alien species had been permitted to witness. The first orbital platform simply ceased to exist. One moment it was a massive fortress bristling with defensive systems. The next it was expanding plasma and scattered debris. The destruction was so complete, so instantaneous, that the pirate sensors couldn't even register what had happened. Impossible, breathed the pirate leader, his scarred face pale with shock as he watched his supposedly impregnable defenses vanish like morning mist. What kind of weapons are those? Captain Vasquez studied the tactical display with professional detachment. The kind we've been developing while you assumed we were incompetent. Mr. Torres, target the second platform. Target acquired. Captain firing. Another brilliant flash illuminated the void, and another piece of the Crimson Fleet's fortress dissolved into component atoms. The remaining pirates began launching ships in panic, their formations dissolving into chaos as they attempted to flee or fight an enemy they couldn't understand. Captain, reported Lieutenant Hayes from sensors, the pirates are attempting to jam our communications and sensor systems. Let them try, Elena replied with grim amusement. Phillips, show them what human electronic warfare looks like. At the communications station, Sergeant Phillips activated systems that had been classified far beyond anything the galactic community had been shown. While alien species had observed humans struggling with basic technology during diplomatic visits, they had never suspected the true depth of human technical capabilities. Initiating full-spectrum dominance, Phillips announced. Within seconds, the pirate jamming attempts didn't just fail, they were turned against their creators. Their own communication systems began broadcasting human override codes. Their targeting computers started feeding false information to their weapon systems, and their navigation arrays began providing coordinates that would send fleeing ships directly into human firing solutions. This is impossible, the pirate leader screamed through the communication channel. Your species can barely operate basic equipment. We've watched you fumble with simple devices. You've watched us pretend to fumble, Elena corrected coldly. There's a difference. One that you're about to understand completely. On the lunar surface below, the pirates' ground installations were discovering just how wrong their assumptions about human capabilities had been. What they had dismissed as clumsy foot soldiers were systematically dismantling defenses that had held against galactic military forces for decades. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park crouched behind a rocky outcrop, watching the massive defensive cannon that protected the pirates' main base. Her squad had infiltrated the position with the fluid precision of predators, moving through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate without triggering the sophisticated alarm systems. Target acquired, she whispered into her comm unit. 47 pirates inside the bunker, automated defenses online, multiple escape routes available. Rules of engagement? Asked Corporal Davis, his earlier performance as a bumbling recruit replaced by the cold efficiency of a professional killer. No survivors, Park replied without hesitation. These are the ones who slaughtered the research station. The ones who killed those children. Her squad moved with inhuman coordination, each member flowing through the complex like liquid death. The pirates had built their defenses to repel conventional assault by species that announced their presence and attacked with predictable tactics. They were not prepared for humans who moved like ghosts and struck like lightning. The defensive cannon exploded in a pillar of flame that could be seen from orbit. Back on the Retribution, Captain Vasquez watched as red indicators across her tactical display turned dark one by one. Each extinguished light represented another piece of the pirates' empire being methodically destroyed by forces they had never imagined humanity possessed. Captain, Torres reported. The pirate flagship is attempting to retreat. They're powering up their jump drive. Negative. No one leaves. Target their engine core. But Captain, they'll try to surrender once they realize they can't escape. Elena's expression hardened. They had their chance to surrender before they started murdering children. Today we're not accepting prisoners. The human weapons reached out across space with impossible accuracy. The pirate flagship, a massive vessel that had terrorized the outer rim for years, found its engines torn apart by forces that penetrated their shields as if they didn't exist. Stranded and helpless, the ship drifted as smaller human vessels closed in like circling sharks. Please, the pirate leader begged through the communication channel, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperate terror. We'll surrender. We'll leave this system. We'll give you whatever you want. What we want, Captain Vasquez replied with absolute finality, is for child killers to face justice. Today we are that justice. She nodded to her weapons officer. The pirate flagship joined its orbital platforms in non-existence. Across the battle zone, the story repeated itself with mechanical precision. Pirates who had spent years believing themselves superior to the clumsy, incompetent humans found themselves outmatched in every possible way. Their weapons couldn't penetrate human defenses. Their sensors couldn't track human movements. Their tactics, refined through decades of successful piracy, proved utterly inadequate against an enemy that fought with capabilities beyond their comprehension. Captain, Lieutenant Hayes announced, sensors show no remaining pirate vessels in the system. All orbital platforms destroyed. Ground installations eliminated. The Crimson Fleet has been completely annihilated. Elena studied the tactical display, now clear of red indicators except for the expanding debris fields that marked the final resting places of pirates who had made the fatal mistake of underestimating humanity. Total casualties on our side? She asked. 0, Captain. Not even minor injuries. Good. Signal the fleet. Mission accomplished. Begin recovery operations for any surviving civilians. Then prepare for jump to the next system. The next system, Captain? Elena turned to face her bridge crew, and for the first time since the operation began, she smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Did you think the Crimson Fleet was the only pirate organization in the Outer Rim? Intelligence has identified 17 separate groups currently operating in human space. Today was just the beginning. She activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, this is Captain Vasquez. The first phase of Operation Cleanup is complete. Prep for hyperspace jump to the Vega system. Time to introduce the galaxy to the real human military. As the human fleet prepared to depart, automated beacon systems began broadcasting across subspace. Soon, every intelligence network in the galaxy would be analyzing footage of the Crimson Fleet's destruction, trying to understand how the clumsy, incompetent humans had achieved the impossible. They would find no answers. They would only discover that everything they thought they knew about humanity had been carefully crafted deception, and that the real human military was about to emerge from the shadows where it had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. That moment had arrived. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of receiving the first reports from the Outer Rim. Ambassador Kethvar materialized in his designated seat through quantum transportation, his crystalline features reflecting a complexity of emotions that his species rarely displayed publicly. This cannot be accurate, he declared before the session had even officially begun. The data streams must be corrupted. There is no way the humans accomplished what these reports suggest. Around the vast chamber, representatives from dozens of species studied their individual data feeds with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. The footage from the Kepler 442 system showed military capabilities that contradicted everything the galactic community thought they knew about human limitations. The chair recognizes Ambassador Chen of the Terran Federation, announced the moderator, though its energy patterns showed significant fluctuation, suggesting even this ancient being was struggling to process what it had witnessed. Sarah Chen stood from her seat with the same fluid grace that had characterized her movements during the previous session. The clumsiness that had amused alien observers for months was completely absent, replaced by a confidence that made several delegates unconsciously lean back in their seats. Honored representatives, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the chamber with perfect clarity. The Terran Federation wishes to report the successful completion of our first anti-piracy operation. The Crimson Fleet has been eliminated. Impossible, sputtered Velthar, his serpentine coils writhing with agitation. Our intelligence networks show the Crimson Fleet possessed over 200 vessels, advanced orbital defenses, and complete control of 3 star systems. No single force in the galaxy could have defeated them so quickly. No single force that you were aware of, Dr. Webb corrected mildly, adjusting his glasses with the same motion that had appeared clumsy just days before. Now, however, the gesture seemed calculated, deliberate, almost predatory. The Etherian delegate, Zeph Randall, spoke in harmonics that resonated through the chamber. If the reports are accurate, then humanity has been misleading the Council regarding their true capabilities. Misleading is such an ugly word, General Hayes said as she rose to her feet. We prefer strategic misdirection. Every species in this chamber has observed our military demonstrations, our diplomatic ceremonies, our cultural exchanges. You drew conclusions based on the data you were provided. You showed us incompetent soldiers stumbling through basic exercises, accused Kethvar. Your elite forces could barely march in formation without tripping. Those were actors, Sarah admitted with a slight smile. Drama students from our universities specifically trained to portray exactly the level of incompetence you expected to see. They performed magnificently, don't you think? The chamber erupted in shocked conversations as delegates processed this revelation. For over a year, every military demonstration, every cultural exchange, every public appearance by human forces had been carefully orchestrated theater designed to reinforce the galaxy's preconceptions about human limitations. But why? Demanded the crystalline being representing the Tauri collective. What possible benefit could come from appearing weak? Dr. Webb cleared his throat. If I may provide some historical context, my species has a saying, appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak. It's from an ancient military philosopher named Sun Tzu. The concept served us well during our development as a spacefaring civilization. You deceived us, Velthar hissed, his scales shifting to colors that indicated extreme agitation. You made us believe you were harmless, incompetent, worthy only of pity and condescension. Yes, Sarah agreed, without a trace of apology. And in doing so, we learned everything we needed to know about each of your species. Your military capabilities, your diplomatic strategies, your economic systems, your technological limitations. 18 months of careful observation while you assumed we were too clumsy to pose any threat. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. While they had been dismissing humanity as galactic newcomers barely capable of basic spaceflight, human intelligence operatives had been systematically cataloging every weakness, every vulnerability, every secret that the established powers thought they had successfully hidden. This is a violation of galactic law, declared Kethvar, his voice rising to a harmonic that indicated severe distress. Espionage against council members is explicitly forbidden. Show me the law, General Hayes challenged. Chapter and verse. Because our legal experts have reviewed every treaty, every agreement, every piece of legislation passed by this council, there is no law against observation. There is no law against allowing other species to draw their own conclusions. There is no law against being underestimated. The moderator's energy patterns stabilized as it processed vast databases of legal precedent. The general is correct. No laws were broken. However, this revelation raises significant questions about the balance of power within our community. Questions like whether humanity has been planning aggressive expansion using intelligence gathered under false pretenses, suggested Zeph Randall, the harmonics of their voice creating complex interference patterns that other species found deeply unsettling. Aggressive expansion? Sarah laughed, and the sound carried undertones that made several predatory species recognize a superior apex predator. Why would we need to expand aggressively when we can simply wait for our neighbors to invite us in? She gestured to her data pad, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber showing detailed intelligence. Reports on every species represented. The Zephyrian Empire's economy is collapsing due to their dependence on Kepler 442 system trade routes that were controlled by the Crimson Fleet until yesterday. Nexus Prime has been struggling with internal rebellion for 3 years. Rebellion that was being supplied with weapons by the same pirates we just eliminated. The Etherian Collective has been hemorrhaging resources trying to protect their outer colonies from exactly the kind of raids we've just ended permanently. The data was accurate, detailed and clearly obtained through intelligence gathering that the aliens had never suspected was occurring. Each species suddenly realized that their carefully guarded secrets had been an open book to human observers. "You're welcome, by the way," Dr. Webb added pleasantly. "The piracy problem that's been draining your resources and destabilizing your governments has been permanently resolved." "Free of charge. At what cost?" demanded Velthar. "What do you want in return for this?" "Assistance?" "Nothing," Sarah replied, and the simple honesty in her voice was more terrifying than any threat could have been. "We eliminated the pirates because they killed children. We don't negotiate with child killers. We don't make deals with slavers. We simply remove them." "And if we had refused to allow this operation?" asked Kethavar, though his crystalline features suggested he already suspected the answer. General Hayes answered with the flat tone of someone stating an obvious fact. "Then we would have informed you after the fact instead of before it. The result would have been identical." The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications. Humanity hadn't asked permission for their anti-piracy campaign. They had announced their intentions as a courtesy, nothing more. The galaxy's opinions, concerns, or objections were irrelevant to human decision-making processes. "What happens now?" asked the moderator, its energy patterns showing unusual fluctuations that indicated genuine uncertainty. Sarah stood, her movements flowing with the grace that her species had hidden for over a year. "Now you recalibrate your understanding of humanity's place in the galactic community. The Outer Rim is under human protection. Any future piracy, slavery, or targeting of civilian populations in those systems will result in the same response you witnessed at Kepler 442. You're claiming sovereignty over the entire Outer Rim." Zeph Randall's harmonics reached frequencies that caused physical discomfort in several species. "We're claiming responsibility for justice in regions where the established galactic powers have failed to provide it," Dr. Webb corrected. "If you have effective solutions to the problems of piracy and slavery, we'd be happy to discuss them. If you don't, then stay out of our way while we implement our own." General Hayes activated her own data display. "Our next operation begins in 72 hours. The Syndicate has been trafficking sentient beings through the Antares sector. They have refused 3 separate demands for the release of their victims." "3 separate demands?" asked Kethvar. "When did humanity issue these demands?" 2 years ago, 14 months ago, and last week," Sarah replied. "We've been very patient, but patience has limits." The implications were staggering. Humanity had been planning these operations for years, systematically identifying targets and building the military capabilities necessary to eliminate them. The bumbling, incompetent facade had been covering preparation for wars that the galaxy never suspected were coming. "The Antares Syndicate operates under the protection of the Hegemony Coalition," warned Velthar. "Attacking them would mean war with a major galactic power." Admiral Marcus Webb stood in the command center of the UHNS Vengeance, humanity's largest dreadnought that the galaxy had never known existed. Around him, holographic displays showed the massive fleet that had assembled for Operation Liberation. Over 300 human warships arranged in formations that defied conventional tactical understanding. "Admiral," reported Captain Kim from the intelligence station, "Hegemony Coalition forces have established a defensive perimeter around the Antares system. We're counting 437 vessels, including their flagship, the Eternal Dominion." Marcus studied the tactical display with the calm expression that had once been mistaken for confusion during diplomatic gatherings. The Hegemony Coalition represented one of the galaxy's 3 major military powers, with technology and resources that had dominated entire sectors for centuries. "Impressive," he admitted. "They've brought significant firepower to protect their slaving allies. What's our assessment of their capabilities?" "Standard galactic military doctrine," replied Colonel Santos, the former clumsy engineer who now served as his strategic advisor. "Heavy shields, energy weapons, formation tactics designed for prolonged engagement. They're expecting a conventional battle." "Of course they are. That's all they've ever known." Marcus activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Webb. Today we introduce the galaxy to the concept of 4th-generation warfare. Begin Phase 1. What followed would have been impossible for the species the galaxy thought they understood. The human fleet didn't advance in the predictable formations that characterize galactic military doctrine. Instead, individual ships began disappearing from sensors, employing stealth technologies that made them effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. Within minutes, 300 human warships had become ghosts haunting the edge of the Antares system. "Sir," Captain Kim announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony flagship." The main view screen activated to show Admiral Thexkar, the Hegemony's most decorated military commander. His reptilian features were arranged in the confident expression of someone who had never experienced defeat. "Human Admiral," Thexkar began with the tone of someone addressing a child, "you are seriously outnumbered and outgunned. Your pathetic fleet has stumbled into a situation far beyond your species' limited capabilities. Withdraw now, and we will allow you to retreat with minimal casualties." Marcus smiled with the same pleasant expression that had fooled diplomats for months. "Admiral Thexkar, I appreciate your concern for human welfare. However, I'm afraid we can't comply with your request. The Antares Syndicate is holding over 40,000 sentient beings in slavery. That ends today." "The Syndicate operates under hegemony protection," Thexkar replied, his confidence unwavering. "Any attack against them constitutes an act of war against the Coalition. Are you prepared for the consequences of such an action?" "Are you?" Marcus asked in return. "Because I don't think you understand what you're facing." Thexkar's laugh was the sound of grinding stone. "I'm facing a collection of clumsy primates in ships that can barely maintain formation. Your entire species couldn't organize a proper military parade, let alone challenge a real military force." "Interesting theory," Marcus mused. "Let's test it. All ships commence Operation Scalpel." The Hegemony fleet never saw what hit them. Human ships materialized from nowhere, appearing inside their defensive formations with impossible precision. Weapons that no galactic power had ever witnessed began systematically dismantling targets with surgical accuracy. This wasn't the crude bombardment of traditional space warfare. This was elimination conducted with the precision of a medical procedure. "Impossible." Thexkar's confident expression dissolved into shock as his sensors registered human vessels appearing and disappearing like phantoms. "How are they penetrating our sensor grids?" His tactical officer, a being that resembled a crystalline spider, worked frantically at its controls. "Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors show empty space, then suddenly detect weapons fire originating from coordinates where nothing exists." On the human flagship, Admiral Webb watched the battle unfold with professional satisfaction. "Status report, Captain Kim. First wave objectives achieved, sir. 17 Hegemony vessels neutralized. Their command and control networks have been compromised, and their formation integrity is collapsing. No human casualties. Excellent. Begin Phase 2. Admiral Thexkar watched in growing horror as his fleet, the pride of the Hegemony Coalition, was systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to exist outside the normal parameters of space combat. Human ships appeared without warning, struck with impossible accuracy, then vanished before his weapons could target them. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from multiple ships. The Draktar heavy cruiser reports catastrophic damage. The Velmiron destroyer squadron is requesting immediate evacuation support." "Impossible," Thexkar growled. "We outnumber them more than 4-1. How can we be losing?" "Because you're fighting yesterday's war with yesterday's tactics." Admiral Webb's voice filled the Hegemony bridge through an open communication channel that hadn't been authorized. "Your technology, your strategy, your entire understanding of warfare is obsolete. You're nothing but bumbling primitives," Thexkar snarled. "We've watched your military demonstrations. Your soldiers can barely walk without falling down." Marcus's laugh was genuinely amused. "Those weren't our soldiers, Admiral. Those were actors hired to reinforce your prejudices. Would you like to meet our actual military personnel?" Before Thexkar could respond, his bridge was filled with figures in advanced armor that had materialized from nowhere. The Hegemony security forces, among the most elite warriors in the galaxy, found themselves facing humans who moved with inhuman speed and precision. Phew! Battle for the bridge lasted exactly 43 seconds, staff. Sergeant Maria Santos secured the command center, while her team systematically disabled every system that could threaten human operations. The same woman who had stumbled through diplomatic receptions for months demonstrated combat skills. that made the galaxy's most feared warriors look like children playing at war. Bridge. Secured, she reported through her comm system. Admiral Thexkar is our prisoner. Hegemony command structure has been neutralized. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. Well done, Sergeant. Signal the remaining hegemony vessels. They have 60 seconds to surrender unconditionally or join their flagship in defeat. The response was immediate. Ships that had dominated galactic military operations for centuries began broadcasting surrender codes, their crews finally understanding that they were facing something completely beyond their experience. Admiral, Captain Kim reported, all hegemony forces have surrendered. The Antares system is under human control. Excellent. Begin liberation operations. Every slave facility, every trafficking center, every compound where sentient beings are held against their will. I want them all eliminated within 6 hours. What followed was a humanitarian operation, conducted with the same precision that had characterized the military campaign. Human forces that the galaxy had dismissed as incompetent demonstrated organizational capabilities that put the most advanced civilizations to shame. Slave compounds that had operated for decades were systematically dismantled. Trafficking networks that had seemed untouchable were torn apart root and branch. Within hours, 40,000 beings who had existed as property found themselves free, protected by humans who had traveled across the galaxy to ensure their liberation. Admiral, Captain Kim announced, we're receiving priority communications from the Galactic Council. Every major power is demanding immediate explanations. Marcus considered this for a moment. Put them through. All of them. Simultaneous feed. The view screen divided into multiple sections, each showing the face of a different galactic leader. Their expressions ranged from shock to fury to barely controlled terror as they confronted the reality that humanity was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. This is an act of war against the established galactic order, declared Chancellor Mordak of the Hegemony Coalition. You have attacked sovereign territory without provocation. We have liberated enslaved populations, Marcus corrected calmly. If protecting slavery is your definition of sovereignty, then perhaps your sovereignty needs to be reconsidered. You cannot simply decide which laws apply to which species, protested Emperor Kalteth of the Stellar Dominion. There are protocols, procedures, diplomatic channels that must be observed. We observed them for 2 years, Admiral Webb replied. We filed formal complaints through every available channel. We requested action through every diplomatic protocol. We were ignored, dismissed, and told that the situation was under consideration. Meanwhile, 40,000 sentient beings remained in chains. The galactic leaders found themselves facing a human military commander who had achieved the impossible, defeating a major galactic power while conducting a flawless humanitarian operation that had freed tens of thousands of slaves. Their political calculations suddenly seemed inadequate to address this new reality. What are your intentions now? Asked Prime Minister Veldash of the Confederation of Worlds, his voice carefully controlled. The emergency session of the Galactic Defense Council convened in the most secure facility known to the established powers. A space station hidden in the gravitational shadow of a black hole, protected by technology from a dozen different civilizations and defended by their combined military might. Emperor Thaklan of the Zephyrian Empire materialized through quantum transport, his crystalline carapace reflecting patterns of anxiety that his species hadn't displayed in over a millennium. Around the circular chamber, leaders from every major galactic power gathered with expressions ranging from barely controlled panic to cold fury. 37 systems, announced Chancellor Mordak, his reptilian features twisted with disbelief. In 2 weeks, the humans have eliminated operations in 37 star systems. Pirates, slavers, trafficking networks, criminal cartels, all gone. Completely destroyed. Not just destroyed, corrected Prime Minister Veldash, consulting data streams that updated in real time. Systematically dismantled with precision that suggests they had detailed intelligence on every target for years. They knew exactly where to strike, exactly what to hit, exactly how to cause maximum damage to criminal infrastructure while minimizing civilian casualties. Emperor Kalteth slammed his massive fist against the conference table, causing the entire station to shiver. 200 years of carefully maintained balance gone. The Outer Rim territories were useful precisely because they were chaotic. The pirates and slavers provided services that our civilizations required but couldn't officially sanction. Services like what? Asked a new voice from the chamber entrance. Every being in the room turned to see three figures entering through security doors that should have been impenetrable. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked with fluid grace between Dr. Marcus Webb and General Patricia Hayes, their movements displaying none of the clumsiness that had characterized their public appearances for over a year. "How did you get in here?" demanded Emperor Thacklon, his crystalline structure resonating with harmonics that indicated extreme distress. "This facility is protected by quantum encryption and dimensional shields. It's impossible to penetrate without authorization." "Nothing is impossible," Dr. Webb replied mildly, adjusting his glasses with a gesture that now seemed calculated rather than bumbling. "You simply assumed that human technology was limited to what we chose to demonstrate publicly. That assumption has proven inadequate." General Hayes activated a holographic display that materialized above the conference table. "We've been monitoring this meeting since it began. Your communications are not as secure as you believe." The display showed detailed schematics of the space station, including defensive systems that were supposedly classified beyond any possible human knowledge. Every security measure, every hidden weapon, every escape route was mapped with impossible accuracy. "You've been spying on our most sensitive installations," accused Chancellor Mordak. "This is a violation of every treaty governing interspecies relations." "Show me the treaty," Sarah challenged, her diplomatic smile revealing edges that hadn't been visible during previous encounters. Chapter and verse. "Because our legal experts have found no law against observation, no restrictions on intelligence gathering, and no prohibition against listening to conversations that you choose to broadcast through subspace. The galactic leaders found themselves in the uncomfortable position of realizing that humanity had been systematically infiltrating their most secure facilities while maintaining the facade of technological incompetence. What do you want?" Emperor Kalteth asked bluntly. "Territory? Resources? Political concessions? Name your price for ending this liberation campaign." "You still don't understand," Dr. Webb said, his academic tone carrying undertones that made several predatory species unconsciously step back. "We're not conducting a campaign for territory or resources. We're cleaning up problems that you've been ignoring for centuries." General Hayes activated additional displays showing human military operations across the galaxy. 17 more systems targeted for liberation operations. The Mordak cartel will be eliminated within 48 hours. The Velteron slave markets will be shut down by week's end. The Kethmore trafficking network will cease to exist before this meeting concludes. You cannot simply decide to restructure galactic civilization according to your moral preferences, protested Prime Minister Veldash. There are economic systems, political arrangements, diplomatic treaties that depend on the current balance of power. Diplomatic treaties that protect slavery, Sarah observed. Economic systems that profit from trafficking sentient beings. Political arrangements that ignore the suffering of billions while preserving the comfort of a few, she gestured. And new displays appeared showing documentation that made several galactic leaders visibly uncomfortable. The Zephyrian Empire's economy depends on rare minerals extracted by slave labor in the Outer Rim. The Confederation of Worlds maintains its technological advantage through research conducted on unwilling subjects purchased from trafficking networks. The Hegemony Coalition funds 40% of its military through taxes levied on piracy operations. The revelations hit the assembled leaders like physical blows. Humanity hadn't just been observing military capabilities and diplomatic procedures. They had been cataloging every moral compromise, every ethical violation, every crime that the established powers had chosen to ignore or enable. "You have no right to judge us," Emperor Thacklon declared, his crystalline structure shifting to frequencies that indicated rage. "Your species has its own history of violence and oppression." "Yes," General Hayes agreed without hesitation. "We've made mistakes. We've fought wars. Enslaved populations committed atrocities that we still struggle to understand. The difference is that we learned from those mistakes. We changed. We evolved." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his mild academic demeanor masking something far more dangerous. 2 centuries ago, my species fought a global war that nearly destroyed our civilization. We learned that some things are worth fighting for, and some evils cannot be tolerated regardless of their convenience to existing power structures. And now you presume to impose your values on the rest of the galaxy? Demanded Chancellor Mordak. We're not imposing anything, Sarah replied calmly. We're simply refusing to tolerate slavery, trafficking, and the mass murder of innocents. If that conflicts with your values, perhaps you need better values. The space station shuddered as proximity alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Through the chamber's viewports, the assembled leaders could see human warships materializing from stealth fields, surrounding the supposedly secret facility with overwhelming firepower. This is Admiral Chen of the United Human Naval Service, a voice announced through the station's communication system. This facility is now under human protection. Any attempt to leave or communicate with outside forces will be considered an act of aggression. Emperor Kalteth's massive frame trembled with barely controlled fury. You're holding us prisoner. This is an act of war against every major galactic power simultaneously. This is a conversation, General Hayes corrected. One that's long overdue. You've spent decades managing a galaxy where children are sold like livestock, where entire populations are enslaved for economic convenience, where piracy and trafficking are tolerated as necessary evils. That ends now. You cannot force an end to practices that have existed for millennia, protested Prime Minister Veldash. The economic disruption alone would destabilize entire sectors. Then we'll restabilize them, Dr. Webb said with the quiet confidence of someone who had already calculated every variable. Human economic planners have developed transition strategies for every affected system. Former slaves will be educated and integrated into productive societies. Criminal organizations will be replaced with legitimate businesses. Resources currently wasted on oppression will be redirected toward development and growth. Sarah activated a final display that showed comprehensive plans for the reconstruction of galactic civilization. The documentation was staggering in its scope and detail, covering everything from economic theory to social integration protocols. You've been planning this for years, Emperor Thaklon realized, his crystalline structure resonating with frequencies that approached despair. The clumsiness, the incompetence, the bumbling diplomacy, it was all cover for the most ambitious social engineering project in galactic history. Not social engineering, Sarah corrected. Justice. We're simply ensuring that sentient beings have the right to live free from slavery, trafficking, and oppression. If that requires restructuring galactic civilization, then galactic civilization needs to be restructured. The assembled leaders found themselves facing a species that had systematically infiltrated their governments, mapped their weaknesses, and developed the military and economic capabilities necessary to enforce their vision of justice across the entire galaxy. What happens now? Asked Chancellor Mordak, his voice carrying the weight of someone who finally understood the magnitude of what they were facing. General Hayes smiled with an expression that had once seemed bumbling but now revealed itself as the face of humanity's true nature. Now you help us build something better, or you get out of our way while we do it ourselves. 6 months after the revelation of humanity's true capabilities, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the reconstructed Galactic Council in a chamber that bore little resemblance to the organization that had once mocked human clumsiness. The seats that had once held representatives of criminal-enabling governments now hosted delegates from reformed societies, struggling to adapt to a galaxy where slavery and trafficking were no longer tolerated. Chair recognizes Ambassador Chen for the quarterly liberation report, announced the moderator, its energy pattern stable for the first time since human intentions had been revealed. Sarah rose with the fluid grace that had been hidden for so long, consulting data displays that showed the transformation of galactic civilization over the past months. The numbers told a story that would have been, impossible to believe just 1 year earlier. The United Human Liberation Fleet reports the completion of operations in 147 star systems, she announced. Former slave populations totaling over 3 million sentient beings have been freed, educated, and integrated into productive societies. Criminal organizations that once controlled vast regions of space have been eliminated or reformed into legitimate enterprises. The chamber listened in silence that would have been unimaginable during the days when human representatives were dismissed as bumbling incompetence. Now every species understood that humanity possessed military capabilities that made resistance impossible, and economic resources that made cooperation profitable. The Outer Rim territories, previously considered ungovernable wastelands, now host thriving colonies and trade networks, Sarah continued. Former pirates have been retrained as security forces protecting the shipping routes they once preyed upon. Former slavers have been repositioned into agricultural and industrial roles more suited to their capabilities. She didn't elaborate on what repositioning meant for those who had trafficked children, but the galaxy had learned not to inquire too deeply into human methods for dealing with those who harmed innocents. Ambassador. Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire raised one of his forearms in a gesture of respectful attention. The crystalline being who had once mocked human clumsiness now spoke with the careful deference of someone who understood exactly how dangerous his neighbors had become. Ambassador Chen, the Zephyrian government wishes to report successful completion of the economic transition protocols provided by human advisors. Our rare mineral extraction operations have been converted to voluntary labor with fair compensation. Productivity has increased by 47%, while operational costs have decreased by 32%. Excellent news, Sarah replied with genuine warmth. Human economic theory suggested that voluntary labor would prove more efficient than slave-based extraction. It's gratifying to see the projections confirmed. What she didn't mention was that the human advisors included intelligence, operatives who monitored every aspect of Zephyrian society to ensure compliance with the new moral standards. The galaxy had learned that humanity's definition of friendship included very thorough supervision. Dr. Marcus Webb, now serving as Director of Galactic Reconstruction, activated holographic displays showing the transformation of dozens of star systems. The Antares sector, former center of the trafficking industry, now hosts the galaxy's largest educational complex. Former victims of the slave trade are being trained in advanced technologies, scientific research, and governmental administration. How many of these former slaves are choosing to return to their home systems? Asked Velthar, the serpentine delegate whose species had learned to appreciate human efficiency in solving problems they had ignored for centuries. Approximately 60%, Dr. Webb replied. The remainder have requested to remain in human-administered territory. They appear to prefer living under governments that don't consider them expendable. The subtle criticism wasn't lost on anyone present. Every species in the chamber had spent centuries tolerating or enabling the trafficking networks that humanity had dismantled in a matter of months. The moral superiority that humans now displayed wasn't theoretical. It was demonstrated through actions that had freed millions and restructured galactic civilization. General Patricia, Hayes rose from her seat, her movements displaying the deadly grace that had been hidden beneath a facade of military incompetence. The Defense Ministry reports complete success in Operation Clean Sweep. The last of the major criminal cartels was eliminated yesterday. The galaxy is now free of large-scale organized crime for the first time in recorded history. What about smaller criminal organizations? Asked Prime Minister Veldash, whose government had learned to cooperate enthusiastically with human initiatives after witnessing what happened to those who resisted. Local law enforcement handles minor infractions, General Hayes replied. Human intervention is reserved for crimes against sentient rights. Theft, fraud, and similar offenses remain under local jurisdiction. Slavery, trafficking, and violence against children trigger immediate human response. The distinction was important. Humanity hadn't imposed totalitarian control over galactic civilization. They had simply established inviolable principles regarding the treatment of sentient beings and demonstrated the military capability to enforce those principles against anyone foolish enough to challenge them. The economic reports from reformed territories show remarkable improvements, noted Emperor Kalteth, whose massive frame now carried itself with the careful posture of someone who understood that physical size meant nothing when facing opponents who possessed superior technology. Systems that were economic drains due to criminal activity are now contributing to galactic prosperity. Sarah nodded approvingly. Human economic modeling indicated that crime represents a massive inefficiency in resource allocation. Removing criminal overhead and redirecting those resources toward productive activities generates wealth that benefits everyone. What the data didn't show was the psychological transformation that had occurred across the galaxy. Species that had spent centuries accepting the existence of slavery and Trafficking as inevitable had been forced to confront the reality that these evils persisted only because they had chosen not to stop them. There is one matter that requires council attention, Dr. Webb announced, his academic tone carrying undertones that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Our intelligence networks have identified rumors of organized resistance to the new order. Some groups appear to be planning a return to pre-liberation criminal activities. The chamber fell silent. Everyone present understood that intelligence networks was a polite term for the comprehensive surveillance apparatus that humanity had revealed. After decades of being dismissed as technologically incompetent, what kind of resistance? Asked Kethavar, though his crystalline features suggested he already suspected the answer. Former slaver organizations attempting to re-establish trafficking networks in remote systems, General Hayes replied. They appear to believe that human attention is focused elsewhere, and that they can resume operations without detection. Sarah smiled with an expression that no longer seemed diplomatic. They're about to learn how thoroughly they've misunderstood the situation. Human fleets are already moving to address these misconceptions. Will there be survivors for questioning? Asked Velthar, his serpentine coils betraying anxiety, despite his species' reputation for emotional control. That depends entirely on whether they surrender immediately upon our arrival, General Hayes answered. Human forces have standing orders regarding the treatment of those who traffic children. Those orders are comprehensive. The delegates absorbed this information with the resignation of beings who had learned that humanity's moral code was enforced with absolute precision and overwhelming force. The galaxy had discovered that humans were capable of remarkable kindness toward those who embraced justice and unspeakable violence toward those who harmed innocents. Any other business before the council? Asked the moderator. Ambassador Chen stood for the final time, her presence commanding attention from every being in the chamber. The Terran Federation wishes to announce the completion of Phase 1 of the Galactic Reconstruction Project. Slavery has been eliminated. Trafficking networks have been destroyed. Major criminal organizations have ceased to exist. She paused, allowing the magnitude of that achievement to register with representatives whose species had considered such goals impossible for millennia. Phase 2 begins next month. Human engineers will begin construction of faster-than-light communication networks, linking every inhabited system. Human educators will establish schools in every sector, currently lacking adequate educational facilities. Human medical teams will provide advanced health care to populations that have been denied proper treatment. The scope of what humanity was proposing staggered the assembled delegates. They were offering to provide infrastructure, education, and health care to the entire galaxy. Improvements that most civilizations could never have imagined, let alone achieved. The cost of such an undertaking, began Emperor Kalteth, will be borne by the Terran Federation. Sarah interrupted. We're not asking for payment. We're not demanding concessions. We're simply building the civilization that should have existed all along.